looking out from our front picture window or the front step, it was just a few feet of visibility into it. So we knew that something different was going on. We hadn't seen rain like that before. Lightning would flash, and it was like a pulsating lightning, I recall, and it would light up the sky for several seconds, enough for you to be able to see a little bit. And other than that, it was dark. Probably about maybe 9 o'clock or so. I really can't recall the exact time, but our window wells filled up and water was pouring in the basement. So my dad and I went outside and took some plywood and laid up over the window wells and put bricks on them, and after we bailed out, and that seemed to do that trick. Little did we know that it was going to be useless in about another hour.
This 1972 flood was far and away the most deadly one in the Black Hills, and depending on the criteria involved, it's one of the deadliest floods in the U.S. or even in the world. So it's a catastrophic loss of life event that's really not been rivaled anywhere. What's unique about the Black Hills is just the way the thunderstorms have the ability to develop and really entrain on the eastern flanks of the Black Hills. So you've got steeper terrain, you've got a bedrock channel with very narrow canyons in the stream drainages. So that doesn't allow the floodwaters to kind of spread out over a wide floodplain. It just takes one giant thunderstorm system to drop buckets of rain in the right spot, and then we've got a flash flooding situation like we had in 1972. The typical stream flow in Rapid Creek is something around 60 cubic feet per second. That really dwarfs the magnitude of the 1972 flood, which was 50,000 cubic feet per second. So the flood magnitudes that we measured after the fact were extraordinary. They hadn't been observed in the modern record. We've only been measuring flows for the last 100 years ago, in the Black Hills since maybe the 1930s. We hadn't seen anything like that before. It's just kind of surreal to think about how life was back in 1972, and just to kind of think about how things used to be, and then think about how, just catastrophic, scary night that was for the people that lived through it. So it's very emotional to listen to the stories of people that lived through this and understand what happened.
The devastation was unreal, and it went for miles. And I think the closer we were to the hills, the faster the water was, the more severe the damage was. But you get downtown, it slowed up a little bit. I remember when the storm finally hit, because I was used to thunderstorms, but I didn't take time to look at it. I just didn't notice it. But I know that once the rain started falling, the rain was falling so hard I couldn't see. I took my glasses off, still wore glasses, because I could see better without them. The rainwater was really intense. I remember that was after dark, or close to dark. What happened was the rain hit, and we started heading to Piedmont, and got to the bridge at 79, Highway 79, we call it the dog track at the time, where Pete Lane's shop is now. And someone said there's a trailer house up against the bridge with kids in it. Well, that sounded kind of bad. And we had some ropes and axes at the house. My folks lived in West Chicago, so let's go back and get it. And my brother and I headed back. And my sisters and young brother were out screwing around in the rain. And so we got them back and got them safe before we went back up. And that probably saved our lives. And secondly, when we got there, as we pulled up, my brother was driving. He's my older brother, Larry. And I looked up to the left. Something happened. There was a lightning or something. I could see a wall of water coming. I said, "Get the hell out of here. Back up fast." And the car ahead of us swept away. And he the first time he did what I told him to do as his little brother, which was kind of cool. And the next thing I remember was the guard showed up with a deuce and a half, a big truck, and someone said, "Hey, there's a house full of people over there that they want to get out." Truck said, driver said, "We'll go down and if you guys will help get the people out." So we did. We were helping people get from the house to the back of the truck. This one young lady said, "This baby's a week old. I'm afraid to carry it. Would you carry it?" I said, "Sure." That's kind of made me feel really awesomely responsive. I said, "Wow." But I said, "We'll make it." So we got to the door of the house, started walking to the truck, and we stepped in the hole. And the water, I think the water was between waist high and knee high. It was pretty deep and moving pretty fast. And anyway, we went underwater. And both the baby and I held the baby like this. I said, "Well, I'm not going to live. I'd never live right if I lost you. So we're either going to both make it or we're both not going to make it." So I would not go. We hit something, came back up, and finished walking to the truck and handed the baby to the mom and went back to get some other people. I had no idea who that baby was. It was a good thing it was dark. Because I think it was been daylight, it scared the hell out of us. I don't think any of us would have had the courage to do it. I have no idea. It looked like a river. We kept hearing someone screaming for help, and this is probably around midnight. There was so much noise. The water just roaring. Finally figured it was kind of in behind the house we took the people out of, and there was two guys up in a tree. And so we had our cheap, lousy, crappy rope along that we inherited somewhere, and tied under my armpits, and jumped in the water to get to him. And the drill was that if I started to go downstream, pull me back, we'll try again. Well, I made it, I think, the first try or second try. And the one guy that was more amiable or healthier, I should, one way of saying it, that held the other guy in the tree. We gave him the first rope out, tied him up, sent him across the stream. My brother and the other guys pulled him in, and I stayed with the other guy. And then when they got him ashore, they tossed the rope back out to me, and I tied it around the other guy, and I said, "We're taking you in." But he was so stiff, he was like a chair. His body temperature was just extremely low. He was very stiff. We decided to get this guy back to the hospital, so we took off to Ellsworth, carried him in the emergency room, and left. And we came out, went to the highway I-90 to come home, and it went underwater. That Saturday morning, the clouds, there was still heavy clouds over, and a lot of fog and mist. It was like something out of some movie, and a lot of debris, upside down cars and boats and houses. It was powerful, I tell you, that water coming down that draw. I mean, the fact that we were able to escape it was amazing. But it carried big, huge trees and floated asphalt and took bridges out. The next day was interesting in that we started helping people here in town, getting people rescued or taken care of. And there's people all over doing good stuff. I remember there's a guy at Stavkirk that I got a call on, or I heard he was hurt and he couldn't get out across the creek. So we took a crew over and flew him out on a Huey, brought a Huey into the Stavkirk and lifted him out. The Huey landed on the parking lot. The poor guy said, "I can't go anywhere. I can't afford to pay a medical bill. I just needed." He was sitting in his car, laying in his car, heard back. And he wouldn't. I said, "You know, really need to get out of here. You really need to get some attention." He said, I lost everything. I have nothing." I said, "Don't. This is not the time to worry about that." He still wouldn't budge. So the Lutheran minister that was in charge of Stavkirk at the time, I went over to him and I called him a chaplain. I said, "Chap," I said, "the man over there needs to go to the hospital. We got a helicopter above to bring him down, to take him out if he'll cooperate." The chaplain went down and talked to him, and he did. So we lifted him out. And as I remember, I was just a citizen working with everybody. I think we had either a fireman or volunteer fireman or somebody that had the radio, and we had contact where we could get contact with the helicopter. That's how we got him in.
The sky was looking real ominous, and we were pretty certain it was going to rain a lot. We had a mobile home. And then at 10 o'clock, somebody knocked on our door and said, "Would you be willing to sandbag because it's raining pretty hard?" "Oh, sure, yeah, we'll finish up our conversation." And then at 10:15, the weatherman said, "Well, there's a lot of rain coming, get out your rowboats." Then at 10:20, a very good high school friend called my husband And my husband wasn't taking him seriously, just laughing at him. And he said, put Jack on the phone. And he's a big burly man. And his voice cracked and he said, Jackie, get out of there now. So I knew it was serious. So I flew into the bedroom and I just got out a suitcase and threw one of our daughter's drawers of clothing in it. In retrospect, it was her winter clothing. It was a poor choice. And we were using cloth diapers, so I took her diaper caddy and I started going toward the door, grabbed my coat. My husband was laughing at me. And I said, I'm going. If you want to come with me, you can. My husband went the next day to see what had happened to our mobile home. And it had gone down the creek about 100 feet, hit a tree, and broken in half. Well, everything was gone. And we were still paying bills on everything, but we didn't have them. But they picked up our photo albums, which was such a brilliant thing to do. And they brought them back. Okay, they were wet, they were full of mud. But in my senior year in high school, I'd worked at a photography studio in our hometown, Redfield. So I was going to give them to my boss and see if she could do something. I was so grateful for those. But I just got blue, you know, there was so much sadness. And I go, Jim, I gotta get out of here.
My brother and I had our rooms downstairs. He came running up the stairs and said he just heard on the radio that Canyon Lake Dam broke, and they said everybody to get out of the flood path. We scrambled into high gear immediately, went out into the garage to get in the car, and directly across the street from where I lived was a family. They had a couple of daughters, and unbeknown to me, there were 3 other girls staying over there that night, so there was 7 people in that house, and I knew that their radio didn't work and they didn't have a TV. And so I told my mom I have to go tell Clark's to get out, and so I just took off running across the street, and the water was rushing. It had to have been at least knee deep. We'd already had seen 2 cars pick up and float down in that water. And I just ran up their front steps and ran into their house, and Jack was fiddling with the radio dial on his radio trying to get something to work. And I just said, they just said that Canyon Lake Dam broke, you're supposed to get out now, and then turned around and took off back to the other side of the street to my house. And by the time I got back across the street, he had loaded everybody up in his 4-wheel drive pickup, and they were already leaving, which was good because the next morning all was there. Their house was a concrete basement. I got in the car, we started backing out of the driveway, and we got down close to the street, and my dad stopped. Lightning flashed, and we looked up the block, and coming around the corner of Dunbarton Street was a literal wall that looked like about 4 feet high, just wood and debris, and just like a plug flow just rolling down the street. And put the car back in drive and went back into the garage. And as soon as we got in the garage and parked, the back of the garage just kind of exploded as that wall hit. We had 3 doors, that door to the garage, a back door and a front door, and we propped them all open and just let the water have its free flow so there'd be no pressure build. And as we're standing in the garage, we saw a hand reach around the side of our garage door. So someone was out there. So we made like a chain down into the water and grabbed the hand and pulled him in toward our house, and it ended up being our neighbor who lived closer to the creek than us. Him and his daughter, who was my age, they were there, and they were heading back to their house when that wall hit, and they got caught in it. It was him and his wife and his daughter. She got swept under and off she went. So they grabbed on some trees in our front yard and made it to our garage door, and then we got him in our house. So they spent the night with us in our attic. His wife, who in our front yard basically got ripped out of his hands, and she was just free on her own. And in that debris-laden water, she made it all the way down to the Bacon Park parking lot, and some people were down there in a boat floating around, and they picked her up and fished her out of the water. So she made it probably a good mile to a mile and a third, mile and a quarter from our house, just free floating in that debris. So we spent the night up there. When we got down from the attic, we heard a voice just screaming, and it was stationary. It wasn't moving. So somebody had got hung up somewhere. So we went out the back and started looking around, and the noise was coming from our backyard. There was a woman who was hung up in the trees, and I'm sure she was thinking she's the only person left alive or whatnot. And we had a flashlight, and so we flashed the flashlight at her a few times, and her screaming stopped. So it was like, okay, someone else is here. In the morning, when the National Guard could come in, we directed them to her, and they got her down out of the trees. And we found out that she came from right below Canyon Lake Dam. This was in early 70s, and one of the kind of decor back then was lamps that had big glass bulbs. And she had grabbed onto that glass bulb and floated on that from Canyon Lake to our house, about a good mile. And that's how she got there.
I had played golf with some friends, and we went to the YMCA to swim, my wife and 2 daughters and I, and then it started to rain. The police department found me, and they told me to rush to City Hall. There were emergency meetings. I had my wife and kids go home, and then we had the flood that night. About 9:30, I found out that there was 80% of the town had been knocked out of the electricity, and I was out by Canyon Lake, and I saw the bridge on the upstream side of Canyon Lake near the fish hatchery. It just collapsed and floated into Canyon Lake. And I was with a crew from the gas company, and one of them said, "Don, somebody could get killed in this damn thing." And I said, "I think you're right." And I said, "I'm going to put out the warning right now." So then I called to KOTA, and I put out the warning, but they ran it on TV and radio for about 12 minutes, and then the TV and radio station ran out of electricity. And then the rest of the night was a night of absolute terror. After I put out the warning, and I ran into a van, and they waved me down, and they said they're from the air base. And I said, "Well, that's wonderful." And they said, "Our commander sent us to town and find somebody to put you to work." And so I said, "Now, fellas, I'm not being bossy. My name's Don Barnett. I'm the mayor of Rapid City, so you belong to me the rest of the night." And they said, "Yes, that's why we came." Well, then I took my 11 men, because we'd gone to a sporting goods store, and we had lots of rope and lots of life jackets. We probably had 40 life jackets and 250 coils of rope. And then we found a mobile home park by the creek at Roosevelt Park, and the National Guard were there, and they were dragging people out of the creek. Heroes, every one of them. And they were doing everything and risking their lives. Policemen and firemen and National Guardsmen were carrying people out of the river and then taking them to St. John's Hospital. There was a fireman there, and he had his truck, and so I said, "Look, I don't have a radio to the fire department. Can I use your truck and call the chief?" And we got the chief on the line, and I'll never forget the next minute. Ken Johnson told me, "Don, I think we lost 3 firemen. They probably perished and will die in the flood." And boy, did that hit me hard. I was 29 years old. I went to Vietnam when I was 27. I had commanded 280 men, and I brought them all home. I didn't do that as mayor. We lost 3 firemen and 1 policeman that terrible night.
My thought all of Friday night was, it's my turn to be the Saturday night reporter, and I'm going to be all by myself. And this is a huge story. And how am I ever going to get it done? Because there's probably going to be people get hurt in this thing. I mean, there could, like the mayor said, people could get killed in this. And that was my thought exactly. There could even be fatalities in this thing, and I'm going to be all by myself on Saturday afternoon reporting this story. That Saturday morning, before I had gone in, to work, I had walked up and down Jackson Boulevard, by which that time the water had receded. 50 feet from my back door, there was a house sitting in the middle of the street. A 1950s style house with attached garage, sitting right smack in the middle of Jackson Boulevard. The garage door was gone. You could look in and see lawn tools still hanging on the wall of the garage. Down the street 4 or 5 blocks, there was another house sitting right in the middle of the street. I walked up and down Jackson Boulevard, and there was every imaginable thing that you lying in the gutter that came from houses. Like there were water heaters and sinks and pots and pans and clothing and tools and toys and debris along the gutters. And then when I was wandering up and down Jackson Boulevard, also I got down as far as Canyon Lake Park. And the dam was gone, and water was still rushing over because the creek was still very wide, and the park was just filled with debris, trees and vehicles and parts of houses. And there was a huge pile of debris, and at the base of this pile of debris was the body of a woman lying in a nightgown. And Don Polovich, our photographer, he was one of the 4 of us that went out the previous night, had gotten back to town and walked past the same thing and took a picture of this debris body of a flood victim. And I think that was the only body picture. The Journal had a policy against running pictures of dead bodies, but they did publish that picture in that Saturday or Sunday edition. And I think that's the only body picture that was ever shown. At the time, the Journal was a 7-day daily with 3 editions Monday through Friday and 2 editions on Saturday, and then the big paper of the week was on Sunday, and this, of course, was Friday night. And the procedure was that most of the Sunday paper was put together during the week. All the media, and especially the electronic media in town, was saying, if your name shows up on a missing list, please call this number immediately so we can remove you from the missing list.
My boss, she called me and she wanted me to come to work, and I said, gosh, I've just worked 10 days in a row. I really wanted this weekend off because I had no idea what had really happened. And she said, Jeanette, it's really bad outside. You really need to come in for a little while. And so I said, okay, I will. I'll come in. And that's when we discovered how bad it really was. If you can imagine, the switchboards were an entire room, both sides of a room. And the switchboards were just lit up like Christmas trees. It was back in the day where you had the old cords and you plugged into the lights, and that was where you picked up a call. And what we discovered was we had people that would be calling in. They're looking for people, or they're going to tell somebody that someone has passed away, that they've been notified. So it was pretty traumatic. And you think, you know, we were kind of the behind the scenes people. We weren't out rescuing people, and we weren't out, you know, discovering people who had lost their lives, but we actually were people behind the scenes helping them connect to other people around the country who were calling in for them too. You know, in a normal shift, we might do 20 or 30 tickets. We always had a ticket for every call that we did. I would guess that an average person probably did hundreds of calls that day in a shift. There were a lot of people, of course, that are very emotional when they're calling in. So they could be crying, or they could be, you know, upset or panicking, trying to find someone. So there were multiple times when that happened. As a matter of fact, my group chief operator came over to me at one point and said, Jeanette, your sister-in-law is on the phone. She needs you to come talk to her. And so I had to go over to another part of the switchboard and pick up the call where she told me she was. And my sister-in-law told me that her brother had actually died because he'd been out rescuing people all night during the flood. But that morning when he was crossing back over on West Main, the bridge that's right by our old McDonald's, or McDonald's on the west side, he was electrocuted. So that was a pretty traumatic phone call. There were so many people that we all knew that had died. And in the case of Bernie, his funeral was actually the first funeral that was televised for flood victims. So the national news was here and actually filmed his service out at Mountain View Cemetery. I think we all knew that we were helping people. We were their connection, and we were doing everything that we could to help them get into communication with whoever they needed to get a hold of. So we felt like we were providing a pretty valuable service, and we're helping people because that's what we all wanted to do.
After 2 days, I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I said, I'll just try long distance one more time. And I got a hold of my dad. And I said, Daddy, you gotta get me out of here. And he said, I will. I had left Jim there to, do what he had to do, but I knew that I had to get better before I could go forward. So Marty and I got on the airplane, and away we go to Aberdeen. And when we came out of there, I mean, we must have looked like refugees. I had the same clothes I'd had on 3 days ago. And when I got down to the bottom, both of our families were down there. My husband's dad was first-generation American. His family was born in Germany. Jim had never seen him emotional. He had never cried. But when we got down off, he said, "Give me my baby." And he took Marty in his arms and he just sobbed. And my sister said that there wasn't a dry eye on the tarmac.
I decided to go in early. My shift was supposed to start at 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon. I went in about 1 o'clock. And to my surprise, the Saturday shift was still, everybody was still there. And they hadn't even put out a Saturday paper. They were all working frantically on the Sunday paper. And so that was a vast load off my shoulders that I didn't have the entire flood story to report all by myself. What I usually did on Saturday night was call the Weather Bureau, or somebody had been in tune with the Weather Bureau all day, so I didn't have to do that. I usually went down to the police station and read the log. Well, the police station had washed away by that time. There was no sense in doing that. I mean, I stayed in the newsroom. I think I did a few things. But for years, I felt guilty for not having a main role in reporting this huge, the century's largest, most sensational news story.
The school board provided a lot of structures and help, and they were part of the team too. And on the third day, they opened 14 classrooms at the old Central High building that's still there. And that's where the charities, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and so many other charities, and they worked out of Central High School so they could so the survivors could do one-day shopping and stop there and get the help they needed. The commander of the Salvation Army was killed in the flood, but his wife took over right away. And I talked to her a few days later. Even in the depth of her grief, she managed that place where people could go eat. In the first 5 days, the Salvation Army fed 27,000 meals. And we had a lot of work to do just in the normal function of city government.
The town did very well as a community. Came together, helped each other, rolled up their sleeves, went to work. Professors, school manager, helped direct traffic. Everybody, it was just amazing what people were willing to do to help.
But I've got to go back with the city council and try to get our department heads functioning as rapidly as possible. And we all agreed There was very little political differential or arguing or petty politics involved in it. The county did a wonderful job. They functioned as one strong voice, and that was wonderful. And the city council remained cohesive, and all of the policies that we adopted were by a vote of 10-0, and I would then ask the clerk to insert into the minutes my support for what the council had just agreed to do. Our federal system of government worked. Governor Knipe got the call from the Highway Patrol during the Friday night. He immediately called the White House and said, we got a disaster in Rapid City and it's impacting 4 counties. We need a presidentially declared disaster. 8 o'clock that morning of the 10th, President Nixon declared a disaster. The following Saturday, Mrs. Nixon came to Rapid City, and we had about 4,000 people in the Stevens High School gymnasium. The governor was there, and he had Mrs. Nixon on his arm. She came to the podium and everything. And Mrs. Nixon became our greatest ally in the White House. There were a couple times I called her. I said, Mrs. Nixon, we just got to move Congress fast. And she said, I'm talking to Dick every day on your behalf. She was a friend forever of Rapid City.
The funding that came in hired the teenagers to go through town. I'm part of the Youth Conservation Corps, and they hired kids to go throughout the city. I recall mostly working in the Canyon Lake area, and shovels and rake. We're just cleaning up the area. And I don't remember if it was Salvation Army or the Red Cross, but a canteen came through every day to feed these teenagers, to help them with the cleanup efforts. And what I recall being a woman back then is they didn't allow the women to go into the homes to help look for bodies. I didn't know this wouldn't be appropriate behavior at 15. 1972, I think girls were just allowed to wear slacks in school. So you're required to wear skirts and nylons to school. I can't remember when that ended, but it was about that time. But it's a very different mindset. So this was just norm, you know.
But we got our house all cleaned up, and in the end, the SBA came into Rapid relatively quick. I'd say within a week or so. They were set up, and they were meeting with all the homeowners and people who'd lost their homes, and then people like us that had a home but it's unusable now. And it was already decided that you can't go back in. The only thing I knew is that our house ended up getting auctioned and bought, jacked it up and moved it to the other side of town off of Anamosa. And it's still there today. And so someone is in that house that I grew up in for my first 15 years, and they're still living in it.
And then when I decided I was strong enough to go back, I did. But you know, everything looked different because there was so much destruction. But people complain sometime about government programs, but they saved us. HUD gave us a rent-free trailer, and then SBA gave the victims a loan, a $5,000 forgiven home loan if you bought a house within a year. So before Christmas, we bought our first home, and it was 750 square feet. It cost $17,000, and we thought that we had signed our life away. but we survived. And I grew to be appreciative that all I lost was that mobile home. Because I still had my husband, and I still had my daughter, and we had a future.
Our newsroom was quite a lively place with people I had never seen before for a while. And reporters from both coasts, and there was even someone from London or someplace overseas who was in briefly. So the Rapid City was overrun with press for a few days. Everybody on the staff was involved in flood coverage, so we all were given tasks to do. I think the thing I did more than anything else was gather information from law enforcement people as to what they were doing, and didn't always, and frequently it became part of somebody else's news story. A fact gatherer.
We need the light of public exposure when you're making public policy. But we were sitting there visiting, and this federal guy, who was the federal mobile home repair guy, and he said, I need authority from the city council and the mayor to bring in contractors and engineers and repair the mobile home parks right where they are right now on the banks of Rapid Creek. Leonard Swanson, the public works director, always attended these city council meetings, and he said, no, we cannot sentence the survivors to one more night on the suicidal floodplain. Those words are tattooed on my soul.
The mayor was a personal friend of mine. We had been classmates in college, and we had developed a relationship in college, which we maintained forever after. And I always sort of thought he was kind of full of hot air at times. But looking back on it, for a guy who was 29 years old, he did a marvelous job as mayor. And the city council forgot all of its differences, and the county commission forgot all of its differences, and even though they argued among themselves and there were political differences in political philosophy among themselves, they all came together.
So we created this park that runs from Canyon Lake down to the fairgrounds. It's about 5 blocks wide and about 5 miles long, and they recreate there, they visit there, they enjoy the high quality of life there, but nobody sleeps there. So we did not sentence the survivors to one more night on the suicidal floodplain.